My children are really cautious around fraud and scams. All things fraud seems to be my life when it comes to work. You won't know this program, or maybe you will. There used to be a program with Tom Selleck, the US actor, called Magnum PI, and he was an investigator. AI has been adopted across mainly the financial services sector, but other areas, blockchain and so on, to make sure it works. Don't forget that little investigator we've all got in ourselves. We can be our own investigator just to think about things. And sometimes, fraud is a serious subject, but investigating can be quite fun, because when you find that little thing which goes, they're a fraudster, they're trying it on, you feel quite good about yourself. Of course, saying just stop lying to yourself. This guy was saying he something like 2 million he'd got from our client, and I said, stop lying to yourself. We're standing, I'm reading it, and he's eyeballing, he's right in my face. And I was like, stop lying to yourself. Hard to tell someone. Me to tell you, Dmytro, you're a liar. You're a con artist. You're, telling someone that to their face, chances are they're going to come and have a shout at you. So got to be careful. And I've had the worst experiences where they've sent someone to my house, and like 6:30 in the morning, knocked on the door, someone gives me a letter. They mention my wife's name. They mention the kids. They say, just to say, look, it's good to be in touch still after the case. It's nice to know where you are. We'll catch up one day. So you can read countless campaigns and awareness and adverts, but until it happens, people don't really understand it.
Hey, welcome everyone to today's episode of Blastland podcast. Our guest is the fraud-busting superhero himself, Arun Chauhan, founder of Tenet Law, fraud specialist, and a man who can smell scam from a mile away. Arun, thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, Dmytro, thanks for having me. Really pleased to be here.
Before we dive into serious stuff, I have to ask you, Arun, do you get suspicious when someone offers you a free coffee, or can you still enjoy the small things in life?
Oh, you know what? I'm actually an optimist. I like to believe that good things go around. If you do the right thing, it comes back to you. So I'd like to think if someone offers me a free coffee, I'm not too suspicious. But yeah, I definitely raise my eyebrows to things which come out of the blue. Things which are maybe a bit more substantive. But saying that, I've infected my children. My children are really cautious around fraud and scams. My youngest, I remember he'd be trading Pokemon cards at school, and he'd come back and go, "Oh, this kid tried to give me a fake Pokemon card, but I spotted it, so I wasn't blatant." And I was like, "Oh, how can you be so, at an innocent age, suspicious?" So yeah, I do believe in the good things in life. That should still continue.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you. Aaron, maybe for those listeners who might not yet know you, do you mind introducing yourself as well?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, my name's Arun Chauhan. I'm a lawyer. I run a specialist law firm called Tenet in England. We specialize in advice around investigations, disputes, and some compliance work arising out of fraud and financial crime. So, if somebody's been dishonest or someone's trying to essentially screw somebody over through lies, we are usually instructed in advising that type of work. I've been working in this area for probably near on 20 years. I do quite a lot of education in the area as well. So I work with certain media outlets like the BBC, Sky News, often speaking about it. I sit on the board of a counter fraud charity called the Fraud Advisory Panel as well in London. And yeah, so all things fraud seems to be my life when it comes to work.
Aaron, you spent years fighting fraud and educating others about it. When did you first realize that was your calling? Was it an eureka moment, or did it creep up on you over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've got a few kind of, I suppose, answers to it. I tell my kids now they're growing up a bit more and they're getting to the later stages of schooling. I'm like, find something you enjoy and that should lead to where you want to do work. And when I was growing up, the stuff I loved as a kid, I loved watching programs where there was kind of investigations. And that could have been stuff like historical stuff, like Indiana Jones. I always saw that as kind of an investigation into what's going on, history, and so on. You won't know this program, or maybe you will. There used to be a program with Tom Selleck, the US actor, called Magnum PI, and he was an investigator. And yeah, I used to watch that all the time. So I've always been curious. I always want to, work out why things have happened. When I started my career in when you train as a lawyer, you have to do different divisions, different areas of law. And I had to do 6 months in the criminal team. And I got really interested in financial crime, financial fraud, why people were doing the wrong thing, why good people did bad things. And so I got interested in criminology as well. So I had that interest in university as well, and part of my law degree. So yeah, I mean, I guess, as I said, in life, I'm an optimist. I think why not? But in work, I think why? And that's kind of come through my entire career. I enjoy the trying to find out what the truth is.
Well, your work involves some pretty complex and high-stake cases. Have you ever come across a fraud attempt so ridiculous you couldn't help but just laugh about it?
Yeah, you'd think I'd see loads of these, but of course, for businesses or even consumers, people who get impacted by fraud, they're embarrassed by it. So you don't hear all the really crazy stories where the fraud attempt is so ridiculous. I've seen a few things. Impersonations are always quite funny. I've seen an organization where their CEO was being impersonated, the classic, make an urgent payment, but the CEO was sitting right next to the person who was receiving the instruction, and it's silly. My kids and I know a number of youthful people get lots of texts and scams like that from banks where they're saying, hey, your account's in trouble, but they're 11 and they wouldn't have a bank account. I think a really good one I saw was the head of fraud for a bank. He recorded this, and he was picked up a call saying, oh, you've got this transaction at risk. I am the head of fraud at this bank, and I just want to assure you you can go ahead with this transaction. And he asked the person, what's your name? And they said, oh, my name's Chris. And this person he was speaking to was a fraudster impersonating him. So the person who was the victim was
Wow.
being, impersonated, and that bank had teed that up. And I thought that was brilliant, So I think there's a lesson here, though. Fraudsters will, and dishonest people have no boundaries, and they will try anything. And hey, if you don't fall for it, they'll go to the next person. So, whilst there's a bit of humor to it, there's a serious undertone that they will try anything to get your money or your assets. So we've got to be guarded to a large extent.
That's interesting. That's interesting. That's a crazy example, actually.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? The idea that, it'd be like me saying, "Hey, Dmytro, you've got to make this payment," and you say to me, I do internal audit, I do accountancy stuff, I check this stuff. Who are you to tell me this? And I said, "Oh, my name's Dmytro, and I'm, impersonate you to trick you." It's crazy. But what the fraudsters are doing now, just as an example, is certainly like on maybe more sometimes on smaller business, but consumers. What they're doing is they'll impersonate a bank, and they will you'll pick up the phone and say, hey, we're X bank, and you'll say, like, you're the customer. You say, well, how do I know you're real? They'll say, go on LinkedIn, look at my name, and you'll find that I work in a fraud position in the bank. And they just pick out people's identities on social media platforms like that and use it to trick people. So fraudsters are ingenious. So sometimes they try it and it's quite silly, but a lot of times, to the people who aren't thinking about it, they get past that senses check pretty quickly.
And we are gonna talk a bit later more about AI. And obviously AI does have two sides. So it's on the one side, it's the bad side, where the potential scammers and fraudsters are trying to use it. And the other side is, of course, combating the fraud, which we're going to discuss a bit later. Can we maybe dive a bit deeper into the most common fraud technologies and applications that of the new era, which they're applying, like probably deepfakes and spear phishings and so on? Maybe you can lose a couple of words on that.
Yeah, I think we have to accept that we've been, as a society, as business, as individuals, we've been transitioned into a digital age very quickly to transacting on pretty much everything we do online. So, banking has moved obviously online, our retail has moved online, people dating is online, everything is um, moved to that way. So, what the fraudsters are doing out there is they're utilizing some really sophisticated technology in order to impersonate, in order to produce very good mock-ups of legitimate companies to make you believe that you're dealing with a genuine individual or business. So you'll see examples. I mean, with AI and deep fakes, there's free software out there. You only need maybe a minute and a half of audio. So a minute and a half of audio of you and I talking now is enough for a fraudster to go and impersonate you. And it's been done to me. I've had an example where I did it at a conference. I was chairing a conference last year, and our first speaker was a cyber safety speaker. And they played a clip of audio right at the start of their talk. And it was my voice saying, "Welcome to the conference, everybody. Really great to have you here. I'll see you in the bar at the end of the event. The first round is on me." And I thought it sounded like me. And, people laugh. I played it to my wife later, and she said it didn't sound like me because she said I'd never buy the first round. But, it's 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 an example though of how little data he needed to impersonate me. And then when you have the ability now to spoof emails to the exact same email format, spoof telephone numbers, to spoof websites to such a close degree to the original, fraudsters are investing a lot of time in that tech ability, and AI is only supporting them in that process. I've seen some really other interesting uses of AI, Dmytro. So, you'll sometimes have contractual disputes, and people will rely on, oh, we didn't form a contract, but we had discussions, and there was a verbal agreement. And the judges will want to look to any documents around the time that might point one way or the other. Now, I can go onto any of these AI sites and say, generate me an email between me in the UK and someone in time zone X using this IP address, using this livery, makeup of the email, the format, this footer, this header, all of the necessary qualities to make it look like a genuine email thread where we discuss this and we agree to make a contract. And AI will output that email thread, back and forth with the time zone showing different time, GMT, US, so on. And that fraudster can just print that out and say, look, I haven't got the original email, but I've got a file copy. And now, to a judge, how are they going to unravel that? The defendant's going to say, hey, look, I don't remember, I've got no record of that email. And the judge will say, well, they've got no record of the email either, but they've got this, and it looks pretty genuine to me. And fraudsters are way ahead of that game at the moment. So, and then when it comes to all the standard kind of cyber attacks, malware, phishing, fraudsters are brilliant at impersonating. So I don't know if we've got time for one more anecdote, story. There was a like cybersecurity company in the US. It was a listed company, and they produced software for cyber kind of protection of computers. And their CEO was very proud of talking about how great their software was. The CEO then got a call one day, and he said a call saying, "Oh, there's been a gas explosion at your children's school." Email follows up straight away, impersonating the school, saying more detail about the gas explosion. Click on this link to identify where you can find your children in a safe place. And more information. And everything he knew about security and not clicking on a link because you are urgently disarmed to think through your emotions and not through your brain, he clicked on that link. Fraudsters got in the back end of their IT systems, found their security keys. They didn't do it for a ransom. They did it just to show their security wasn't as safe as he thought. And he brought their security network down, and it absolutely killed their share price. So fraudsters are really using AI tech, using tech to impersonate really well, and that's what we're up against. So that's why we'll talk about some caution later.
Wow, that's a really crazy example. Aaron, is it legitimate to state that basically all fraud attempts are usually connected with a sense of urgency and pressure? Is that a common trace?
I think so. I think a lot of the fraud attempts we see are um, maybe more so with consumers, Dmytro, more about the individual being put in a place in time thinking, oh my gosh, we've got no real time to think about this. So there's two sides to that pressure. There's one where your asset's at risk unless you do something now, and we're the person on the other side of this phone or this email exchange, which can give you confidence to solve this problem. Or is the pressure that you're going to miss out on this opportunity to make money, and you're one of the few who has been selected, but I can only offer this opportunity to you now. And that sometimes transposes into business as well. The clever thing fraudsters do, external bad actors do, certainly around procurement and supply to businesses, is adopt that speed and pressure. But they do it on a sale of something which is at the core nature of the business. So an example, I had a jewelry manufacturer, and they got approached about office equipment, and it was a great opportunity for office equipment, which was linked to making retail savings in other areas in their business. And they didn't understand the product they were being sold, but what they knew that they were going to make a couple of £100,000 on savings from this approach. What they didn't appreciate is that the opportunity was really short term. They were pressured into it. They didn't understand it, and they went ahead. And ultimately, what they ended up doing was losing £1 million, over £1 million, because they got caught up in, long stories, and finance agreements which were linked to this purchase of this equipment. So yeah, we have to be really cautious that if people make you feel unease that you've got to act really quickly in a business context or in a personal context, that should be one of those red flags to stand back, go and, we'll talk about some tips about how to try and protect yourselves and your business. But you've got to stand back and start to think about it a little bit more carefully. Nothing is so urgent, in my view, that you have to respond there and then.
That is a good statement. Nothing is so urgent. I think it's key in this sense. Ern, it's probably worth mentioning to our audience that both you and me, are real. We are not AI generated. We are not avatars. We are really here and we are speaking. So we're not deep fakes. I confirm it from my side, at least.
Yeah, well, I confirm it for myself. You knew, I'll tell you, if I'm a deep fake because I'd offer to buy everybody a drink.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there you go.
You founded an award-winning law firm that breaks actually the mold, no targets, no presentism. How does that culture contribute to combating fraud?
Yeah, I mean, culture. Yeah, we have a thing about culture here. I'll talk about us briefly first. So our approaches. So we're a litigation firm. In the majority of our work, we deal with these investigations and disputes. And we're probably the only firm which doesn't have financial or billable hour targets for our people. We don't really have presenteeism either, but you can work where you need to work. And all our lawyers are from national, international firms previously. What I found is you focus on your people and take away all the friction that gets in the way of them focusing on their product or their work. They get a great job done. And the following thing is you get profit out of that. And culture to me is really important because if you look after your people, they look after you. And then that feeds into fraud, really, in a way. So culture is really important when it comes to fraud. There's two facets. One's a slight plug for something we've got on our website. The other is more of a strategic thing around whistleblowing. So the first thing, there's a classic for the audience who haven't talked or listened about fraud. There's a classic thesis which came out in the 1970s called the fraud triangle. And that was a thesis that people, eco-friendly lighting. There's people that will perpetrate fraud. They'll commit fraud because they're under pressure. That's the part of the triangle. So what drives the fraud is they're under pressure. They will seek out this next side of the triangle, opportunity. So, there's a lack of segregation of duties. They're under pressure because they've got gambling problems or they've got marital issues. They take the opportunity of lack of segregation at work. They find a way to get the money out and they rationalize it like, well, I'm not being paid well enough in my job, so I'm going to redress the balance. We did a piece of work. We did a white paper on and it's on our website. It's called Leading to Loss. And that talks about an alternative fraud triangle. And it's about leadership. And leadership set. So one side is leadership. The other side is culture. And you have like these mission statements in businesses. Oh, this is how we do things around here. This is our employability statements. But the people essentially on the shop floor, the people doing the doing, say, well, that's not how we do things around here. They say that's how we operate. But actually what we do is something quite different and it's more strenuous. And those individuals, because of that culture being a bit fractured, are disenchanted. And when people are disenchanted, they work in silos and they start to do the right thing for them rather than the right thing. And that creates a fraud risk. So leadership and culture is really important to eradicating fraud risk, because if you have people acting in silos, think about the banking industry, think investment banking, what you'll have is that, you won't just have a lone wolf bad actor, you could have a pack of wolves. So culture is really important from leadership, because if you don't get that right, you'll have disenchanted people. They won't be your eyes and ears. They won't protect you. They'll think about themselves, or worse, they'll go and commit fraud to bend the rules, to achieve targets, to do whatever it is. The second part of culture, which is really important, is how we frame our people being our eyes and ears. We talk, whistleblowing in the UK is not that prominent. So in the US, it's much more prominent, but there's rewards around whistleblowing in certain instances. It differs around different places. There are elements in the UK Competition and Markets Authority where you can get awards. But whistleblowing is about, if you see some wrongdoing, report it. So as a whistleblower, as an employee, your culture is saying you have to be judge and jury and decide if there's wrongdoing before you tell on one of your colleagues and blow the whistle. And we need to move that from kind of on the right-hand side, move it all the way over to the left, to move the spectrum, dial the spectrum down, to say, well, actually, you don't have a whistleblowing program, you have a business integrity program. And people who can see that there's a risk of the business integrity of that business being breached, or someone's actually doing something wrong, talk about blowing the whistle on business integrity. People aren't doing things around here the way we want to be doing them. That cultural shift will actually, over time, reduce fraud and have more people find it, detect it, spot the risk, stop it happening. And, the problem, as I say, the problem with whistleblowing now, it's like a trip hazard. What it's saying is, I've seen someone fall over that trip hazard, as opposed to saying, I see the risk of that trip hazard. No one's been hurt yet. Let's do something about it. So culture is really important. And I could talk about that for the whole hour, but I'll keep it about that for 4 or 5 minutes. Sorry.
No, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. Thank you for that. Aaron, despite countless awareness campaigns and safeguards, both on the corporate level and private level, companies and individuals still fall victim to fraud. Why do you think that keeps happening?
I think it's because we're busy. We're all really busy. If you think about the number of communication channels we have to deal with, the number of emails, direct messages, we're on Slack, you've got traditional old phone messages. Occasionally you'll get a phone call, you're on Teams meetings, we're back to back. We don't have time to allow our brains to breathe. And so when you don't have time to stand back and think, or you're forced through that kind of pressure and sophistication of fraud to think you haven't got time to think, we are susceptible. That's one side of it, that busyness, that we don't have time to think. Just seeing like an odd email coming in. I'll get emails where it still gets through our spam filter, where someone will impersonate one of my colleagues saying, oh, I wonder if you're coming into the office today. If you're not, can you just check on this document on this link? Just want to chat about it. And I know to hover over the email, that part that says their name, and behind it I can see the true email sender, and I can see it's someone trying to impersonate. We don't have time to think like that. So, unless you automatically think like that, we're too busy. we talked about sophistication. We don't appreciate how sophisticated fraudsters are, and one of the biggest problems is we don't really understand it until it happens. You can read countless campaigns and awareness and adverts, but until it happens, people don't really understand it. So one way to change that is part of the education program in organizations is make it relatable. So talk about fraud in a way that relates to people. And, we can talk about some of those anecdotes later, but, simple things, Dmytro, if you're in a restaurant and somebody brings out the bill who works at the restaurant and they undercharge you, they forget a starter, they forget a glass of wine or a dessert, do you put your hand up and do you own up? And I ask that question sometimes in training, and then, about 30% of people will say, yeah, I'll own up. And then I say, oh, if your employer overpaid you by mistake as well, would you own up? And they all say, yeah, we don't own up. It's like, okay, why? Why the difference? And they say things like, well, in the restaurant example, they say, we wouldn't, it's bad service, or it's a big chain, it's a big organization. And they kind of deal with self-redress. But in the employer example, they say, oh, maybe we'll be caught. Fair enough, you'd be caught. In both examples, they're both instances of fraud, but you won't think the restaurant example is an instance of fraud. You're taking something without payment. And that is an example of us not understanding fraud. So when we're busy, we don't know what fraud looks like. We don't think about fraud. Our people won't either. And as I said earlier, there are often opportunities which are outside our areas of expertise, and we are in need of a good news story. So many frauds happen where we just want to catch a break and something good comes along and we think this is our opportunity to catch a break, make some money quicker rather than having to work really hard. And fraudsters prey on that vulnerability.
We already touched upon the sense of urgency and a couple of other moments, but still, would you emphasize maybe some common psychological tactics that fraudsters use to trick even the smartest people? And how can we train ourselves to spot these, at least, orange flags or red flags?
Yeah, so the common trait, if I take investment fraud, and we see quite a lot of that, be it investment in property off plan or development or in financial products, is fraudsters will they'll be really sophisticated. So they'll look for someone who's sold a company recently and they've maybe had a reward out of a share sale, a decent amount of money. Then they'll phone them and target them or contact them and say, I've got a great opportunity to invest probably in a product the individual doesn't understand. And you are one of the few selected, but this is only available for 1 week. And we can give you an example of how this return can work. You only need to invest a small amount and you'll start to see immediately returns we're able to give you. So the psychological tactics are also merged with practical tactics. Who's got money? Who's suddenly at a loose end? When we're talking investment fraud, and then saying, right, this is an opportunity for you and you are being made to feel special. You are one of the few who are going to get this. Same thing with supply opportunities in business. We can get you your supply, let's say, I don't know, it's in the food sector. We can get you supply of this product to help on, your part of your ingredients supply chain. We can get it for X price. And people will go like, okay, we'll verify. Can we verify the product's the true product? It's genuine. It's, it's not adulteration or it's not some kind of faking of the food product. Yeah, you can do that, but you can get it at this price. And people are under pressure in businesses, are they? Managers need to find margins in the business. Owners of businesses need to find margin. Listed companies still need to make savings for their shareholders. So fraudsters use that psychological research to understand and put pressure and give the opportunity. If you're doing a pitch, Dmytro, for a business, or I'm doing a pitch, it's not about, hey, look, I know you know your stuff, you'll know I know my stuff. It's not about the law I know, it's how well do I know their business. That's what fraudsters do. And then they'll play on people who are down on their luck. I think it's important, though, when, if we're alive to that risk, we've got to be alive to how can we protect ourselves. I think that was the second part of your question. I kind of work on this concept I've developed, I guess. I haven't really put it into writing. I call it like the street. I talk about triangles a lot. It must be a fraud thing. I call it street smarts triangle. And with any transaction, I ask myself, and I urge people, business or consumers, to ask themselves three things. Who approached who? First question. Who came to who? Doesn't matter how they came to you, what the story is, who approached who. Second thing, when you understand the proposition, independently verify it. So that's not verification through someone, the fraudster in this case, has said, oh, you can get testimonials from my contacts and colleagues. Sorry if you can hear this drilling in the background. It's slightly
That's not a problem.
frustrating.
We hear you perfectly.
Okay, fine. So the verification independently, go and speak to an accountant, a lawyer, someone who can help you, a friend who can help you stand back and go, okay, that looks legitimate. IP addresses, everything. And then ask yourself, do you really understand how it is that offer can be that offer? You know that whole phrase, it's too good to be true. And, sometimes that's quite demeaning to individuals who get defrauded because everyone goes, oh, God, it's too good to be true. And then you get people in the counter fraud space or fraud investigation space say, hey, if it's too good to be true, you must have been dealing with an amateur fraudster because it shouldn't be that obvious. But do you understand it? So I come to you with a transaction to invest in a company, and this is how we're going to use the money, and this is what we're going to do. Well, okay, do I really understand how's that going to lead to me getting a return and recovery in this time frame you're telling me? And if you don't understand it, ask questions, back to independent verification until you understand it, you've verified it, and then it might matter less that they've approached you. But start, those three things. Do you understand it? Have you independently verified it? Who approached you? And then you've got a good sense to protect yourself.
In your experience, do smaller companies face different fraud risks than larger corporations, or are the challenges plus minus universal?
Yeah, fraud pervades everywhere. It can hit any ecosystem, no matter if the business is large or small. It's going to look at you. It's going to be attacking your data, your finances, your supply chain, your employees, your IT infrastructure. So whether you're a big business or a small business, you've still got the same risk. The fraudsters aren't selective in that sense. They'll go for where the opportunity arises. Now, in some cases, that might be the smaller businesses because they have less defenses automatically. Now, the situation really is, I think for larger organizations, in a sense, they're sanction driven to have controls in place. They're going to have auditors, they're going to be regulators driving controls and governance. Listed companies obviously have a lot of regulations around their corporate affairs. So larger companies, as a matter of course, will think about fraud because they're told to. And they are worried, maybe even, it's fair to say, they're worried more about avoiding a fine than they are the financial crime that might be sitting beneath it. But it can hit smaller companies and smaller businesses. I think certainly, those family businesses that have grown up, they're very altruistic. They almost see trust as a control. And trust isn't a control. Trust is great in a business. I have loads of trust in my business, but I have controls. And the controls are there because they protect your people. And that's the message. As a small business, it's not wrong to have procedures and controls because they protect your people. In fact, you're demonstrating your trust in everyone because you want to look after them. So the risks are similar. The responses are different from small businesses. They don't have the capacity, the money, or the knowledge to invest in fraud protection. And so that's where the gaps sometimes are exposed.
Now let's talk about AI. The fraud detection tools have advanced for sure. And with AI and machine learning playing a major role nowadays, is there still room for the good old human instinct in catching fraudsters? And the second part of the question would be if and whether you are using already AI tools to catch up fraudsters.
Yeah, so look, AI has been used for the good as well. MasterCard have got some great software which works in kind of identifying real-time likelihood of banking transaction fraud. AI has been adopted across mainly the financial services sector, but other areas, blockchain and so on too, to make sure it works. I think there's nothing better though than human instinct. And fraudsters also know that. That's why they go through the approach to make you feel special and they're busy, you know, if you're busy. But there's nothing better than that kind of human instinct. If I come back to that kind of street smarts idea of understanding something, AI you can run. There's software now where we see it, and we use it a little bit to help more on kind of pro bono stuff we do because it's consumers, and we run a pro bono scheme for consumers with the university. But we can run messages, text messages, WhatsApp messages, emails through a bit of software we've seen, and it will give us a likelihood score that it's fraud. So AI is doing that because it's understanding the technique, the language, and that type of software I've seen, I think it should be made available to the public and it should be easy. So AI definitely helps. But I think certainly on a business fraud case, there's nothing better than human instinct and using the resource you've got on the ground in your teams to unravel and unpick opportunities because, we have a lot of knowledge in our businesses and sometimes we don't utilize it because they've never been resourced to think about fraud. So when we get them to think about fraud, they can actually spot those challenges. And I think, don't forget that human instinct. Again, every business opportunity is an opportunity for fraudsters, an opportunity for us. So just be on our guard.
Aaron, cybercrime and phishing scams have become more sophisticated and skyrocketed in the recent years. What's your advice for someone who gets an email saying they've won $1 million or inherited a fortune?
Apart from saying congratulations, can I be your friend? Give me that free coffee. Look, back to I feel like I'm repeating myself, but back to my things. So who approached who? Can you independently verify it? Does it make sense? I think just because you get that approach doesn't mean it's not necessarily true, highly unlikely. But it's, have you played the game to win that money that they told you've awarded? I think there is a real sophistication in the way that the fraudsters can pose the opportunity to you to make it sound really believable. And they're brilliant when they speak to you on the phone. They are so plausible that you are convinced. And they don't necessarily do it in a pressured way. They just buy your trust. So back to being your own investigator. I think, maybe that's what I'm trying to find out here for everyone is, don't forget that little investigator we've all got in ourselves. We can be our own investigator just to think about things. And sometimes, fraud is a serious subject, but investigating can be quite fun because when you find that little thing which goes, they're a fraudster, they're trying it on, you feel quite good about yourself. But I think, it's, these phishing scams, the cyber scams, obviously don't click on links. Don't take at face value what you believe. If it's the first time it's come out off the bat and it's come to you, be really cautious. Get out there. Independent verification is everything, really.
When talking about fun, actually, fraud prevention sounds like a very serious business. But we know humor plays still an important role in storytelling. So what's your favorite anecdote or metaphor to help people understand fraud risks?
Yeah, so I do a lot of I do get asked to do quite a bit of training for organizations to help them instill a fraud strategy and prevention. It can be in all kinds of construction, manufacturing, other areas, financial services. But I have a number of anecdotes. I think telling human stories is really important. And one of the things I talk about is small frauds and how we don't think about small frauds and how our people might not necessarily think what they do is fraud. And if your people don't think of that, well, then how are you going to think about the bigger frauds and the risks? So I tell a story, and the story goes something like this: that these parents of a young child, age 6, 5, 6, get a letter back from school. The headmaster, the head of the school, one day and say, "Oh, your son has been taking some of the stationery home, but not returning it. You know, ruler, some crayons, some pens. Really, we can't condone that type of behaviour. That's taking property of the school away. You know that's wrong. Can you please just have a word with your son?" And these parents were horrified. They said, "Look," sat the son down and said, "You can't do that. People think it's stealing. It's wrong. Look, if you want pens or anything, I've got loads of them at work. I can bring them back for you." And it's that whole story of the parents don't recognize that they have normalized their behavior to bring stationery, which belongs to their employer, back and use it and give it to their family and give it to their kids to play with. But it's wrong for the child to do that from school. And there's human stories like that where you normalize, which is what normalize almost dishonest behavior, like the restaurant. I talk about that quite a bit. We normalize behavior. We think some people will see the restaurant, Dmytro, as, "Hey, it's my lucky day. Good things don't happen to me. I've not got to pay for this." But it might mean that it comes out of the paycheck of the employee who failed or made the mistake. And yeah, I tell that story. Yeah, I also tell the story that when I was getting married, I'm Indian background. We had quite a traditional kind of wedding in the sense that I think someone got us a gift and they managed to get extra wine glasses without paying for it. They got 6 and they paid for 4, and they were really proud that this store didn't charge them for the other 2. And I was horrified. I was like, that's dishonesty. You can't do that. And for some people, normalize it and they think it's an opportunity. So yeah, tell those human stories. Your people will find it much more relatable and talk about fraud with ease in an organization.
Aaron, I have a special question, probably with a piece of humor. Have you ever met physically a fraudulent guy? And if yes, what did you tell him or her looking into the eyes?
Yeah, I've met quite a few in court, typically. I've had bad experience with them. I have said on a few occasion things like it's difficult. I mean, it's only happened a few times where I've had to have the outright conversation. I'll tell you the good side and the bad side of the risk of meeting the fraudster. One is, I know what you're doing, I know what you've done, and we're going to get this money back from you. And I've had that conversation. So, you can't fool me. We're on to you. Game's up. Um, I remember once at court saying, "Just stop lying to yourself." This guy was saying something like 2 million he'd got from our client, and I said, "Stop lying to yourself." We're standing, I'm writing it, and he's eyeballing, he's right in my face. And I was like, "Stop lying to yourself." But they, if sometimes quite a lot of fraudsters are so wrapped up in their fraud, they believe themselves inside out, so they don't. But on the bad side, I've had situations where I've met the fraudster, we've gone through a long court case, and I've had the worst experiences where they've sent someone to my house, and like 6:30 in the morning, knocked on the door, someone gives me a letter. They mention my wife's name, they mention the kids. They say, just to say, "Look, it's good to be in touch still after the case. It's nice to know where you are. We catch up one day." So I spent 4 hours in the police station after that. So I suppose a message to people listening, watching versus, you might have the courage to confront the fraudster, but you need to really understand what their background is, because if they're a chancer, yeah, okay, it might be okay to have the conversation. If they're part of an organized crime gang, you don't want to be involved in that conversation. Keep a distance, do it the proper way, be it through lawyers or however. But yeah, so you can have some fun with it, but you've got to be quite pushy in my job, and you've got to tell people. It's hard to tell someone. Me to tell you, Dmytro, you're a liar, you're a con artist. You're, telling someone that to their face. Chances are they're going to come and have a shout at you. So got to be careful.
Well, obviously, to do the job you are doing, you have to have a very special and very strong character, I assume, because it's a job not for everyone. Working and finding out the fraud and meeting those guys, yeah. So
yeah, I guess.
Aaron, you worked across various industries and multiple cases. Is there one success story that you're particularly proud of, where you helped someone recover from a major fraud incident?
Yeah, I think we should put in context like the size of the type of work we do. We tend to deal with work up to about 10 million of loss. So we sit in the space between the really big firms and who deal with our area of work, and we're a kind of like niche boutique. But I remember, there were two brothers who suffered a loss on a property investment fraud, and they suffered that loss. They went to lawyers for 2 years. They couldn't get anywhere with it. They went to 3, 4 law firms. They couldn't get anywhere with it, and they suffered over 2 million. And then eventually, somehow they found us, or found me. And I looked at it through a different lens, and we ended up proving the fraud. We found a lot of assets. We ran negligence claims against the law firms that misadvised them earlier. Had they acted quick, had those law firms picked the fraud out, they would have got to recovery quicker, and they would have reduced the impact of the fraud on these two brothers who made an investment. It's a property investment. And through negligence claims and asset recovery, we recovered pretty much the 2 million back. But they had been lost for 2.5 years, and they thought they'd lost everything. And one of them suffered psychologically really badly with that. And we got them there. And the other good news thing about that story is it's not that client. The best stories, the best recovery outcomes we've had is where our clients invested in the effort and time it takes to get to the end of these cases, to get the money back. In this case, our client did a lot of digging and researching, and if a client's invested as well, and it's our effort is a team effort. It's a team effort with the client. The clients have lived and breathed it. Then they give you information you may not think. So you've got to encourage clients. And that was one where we encouraged the clients to be part of this investigation and part of this litigation, not just a client. And that's how we work. And we got a great outcome. That one will live with me for years because they were broken, but for what happened.
What's one myth about fraud prevention that you wish you could debunk once and for all, if there is one?
I guess that it's expensive. If you're in a business context, that putting in fraud prevention is expensive. Is maybe 2 myths. It's expensive, and it's all about policies and procedures. I think fraud prevention actually is best driven by culture. We talked about this earlier. If you could get all your teams in your businesses talking about fraud, maybe once every 6 months or once a year, saying, how would we in our roles in this business defraud our employer? Where are the gaps? Be brave enough as a business, or think, how could we be defrauded, and get that information from people who are doing the doing, those people on the shop floor. That culture will spread into thinking about fraud, preventing it. It will help detect it. It will feed real risks up to directors of compliance, directors of governance. And it engages your people, and it's a deterrent. And not one part of that needed a lawyer to come in or an accountant to put in controls, checks, balances. It's driven from your people. So culture is an inexpensive, fantastic tool. And that's why I say it's not just about policies and procedures. The problem with policies and procedures are they tend to sit on a shelf. They tend to not be practicable. And they're not built with the people in mind. So again, policies and procedures where you have your team saying, well, how would I defraud our organization in the way I do my job now? Well, where are the gaps? Well, if they show those gaps and the way they need to work to get their job done, then you build a procedure around fraud, which is actually going to protect your business. So making procedures that work for your people, not just for your business, is really important. So it's not a big thing to do, and that's what we try to tell where we help organizations, certainly charities. We're trying to make it cost effective for them, just to be safer.
When talking about culture, we discussed it today already a couple of times. Do you think that it might also begin at schools with the education of children with a subject called fraud prevention, beginning from the 5th form or 6th form? Do you think it would be an appropriate mechanism to DNA this to the kids?
100%. 100%. I've been screaming about this, maybe not loud enough, but for a long time. I was really lucky that in England they've got the most people have heard of the House of Lords here, part of Parliament, and they did an inquiry about the impact of fraud in the UK, digital fraud, and they asked for evidence from lots of people. For some reason, they asked me to come give evidence, so I gave evidence to the select committee. And I had all these lords and baronesses on this. It was during COVID, so on a video call. And I talked about just this. We need to educate children about fraud, how it presents, how they can protect themselves before they get a bank account. And because this is the next generation and they will be our next employers' eyes and ears, or our employees of our future. And one of the lords said to me, why? I said, ages of maybe 14, 15. He said, well, why not at primary school? Why not at 8, 9, 10 years of age? And I actually agreed. I just said, well, I didn't think anyone would buy into that. And we're starting to have more education around financial literacy, about debt, about financial management. I think there needs to be AI literacy at schools, but I think it needs to all be weaved in with fraud literacy. How does it happen? I'm 100%. I think it's all really important also because children speak to their parents, children speak to their grandparents, and those pockets of society, parents, grandparents may not have the means to learning it, apart from maybe watching consumer television shows or things like that, or reading the papers or news. Parents are very busy. But they listen to their kids when they come home from school. What did you learn at school today? I learned about fraud. What do you mean you learned about fraud? Did you know, Mum? I just think it's such an effective tool. If that could be a standard part of the curriculum for every school, opportunity, be it in England, be it in Europe, anywhere, it'd be a great thing.
This has been an eye-opening conversation, Aaron. Before we let you go, any final words of wisdom or a fraud-related mantra you live by to all our listeners today?
Wow. I think for anybody, give yourself courage to trust your instincts and give yourself time to investigate your instincts. We are our own safety shield. We have our own kind of superpower in that sense. So give yourself that trust of time and trust in your instincts. And more often than not, I think people will then go and reach out, get advice, and realize that they could be safe. So, trust in yourself. That's probably the biggest thing right now.
Aaron, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and some great stories with all of us. And to all our listeners, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So see you next time.
Thanks, Dmytro. Thanks, everybody.